of you who don't know me, I'm Melissa Kravitz. I'm one of the co-chairs of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. Erin Wagner, the other co-chair, is out sick today. I also wanted to announce and thank Conifer Salintung, who is our intern this semester, who got everything set up in the room and is going to be recording our event. So if you have any questions about the minor, you can ask Conifer, you can also ask me or Dr. Wagner. This is a minor here on campus. Feel free to get swag, take snacks as well. Okay, so we're really happy today for the first talk of the semester to have Kathleen Roberts, who actually is a Longwood graduate from 2012.
Yes.
And she has a bachelor's in social work, and she also obtained a master's in social work from VCU with a certificate in gender violence intervention. So she worked in the Richmond area at different nonprofits for domestic and sexual violence while pursuing her clinical hours, and received a license in clinical social work in 2017. And since then, she's worked as a therapist specializing in trauma and trained in EMDR, a trauma-based therapeutic intervention. And she came to Longwood as the Title IX coordinator in September of 2022, so fairly like a year and a half ago. And she oversees the institution's Title IX policy and ensures that we Longwood comply with federal policy. So she's going to give a talk today called Title IX, Past, Present, and Future. We're really happy to have her. Thank you very much, Kathleen, for speaking to us.
Thanks for the introduction. Hello. Thank you all for being here. Can y'all hear me? Am I loud enough? Beautiful. Okay. This font is a little bit smaller than I thought, so I apologize for the eye strain, but hopefully it'll get better. So when you think of Title IX, what comes to mind? There's no wrong answer. Sports, okay. What else?
Is the Dear Colleague letter?
The Dear Colleague letter, yes. Which we'll get to in our timeline. Anything else? Sexual assault, sexual misconduct, yes, all of that. Thank you. So all of those answers are correct. And so Title IX was passed into law by President Nixon in 1972, which means we are coming up on 52 years, which was a big anniversary a couple years ago. And so again, this font is so small, I'm sorry, but that's kind of the preamble to the language within the education amendments. This is kind of what laid the foundation. No person should experience discrimination based on their sex at any educational institution that receives federal funding. That includes Longwood, because a lot of us are going to college with financial aid. So that's how we qualify. Is that making sense so far? Okay, so we're going to move throughout this timeline. So the next kind of significant thing that I thought was interesting, at least, was in 1980, which is when Title IX was assigned to the Office of Civil Rights for oversight. That is still true today. So you'll hear people possibly talk about OCR. That's what it is, the Office of Civil Rights. So they make sure that all schools are complying with federal guidelines. And if a school is not doing it right, you can make a complaint to OCR, and they'll investigate and try to make it right. Then between 1984 and 1988, you're going to start to see this again in the recent past, but there was a lot of back and forth over what Title IX should or should not encompass. So they talked about what programs or activities should be covered or what should not be covered, that sort of thing. And it was applying a lot in the context of athletics and student scholarships. So it was really tied up in the finances of it. But like I said, back and forth, you'll see a theme. And, oh yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize it dated back. So that's new to me. That's awesome. Do you know when Nixon put that into action, was it a popular very well supported thing?
That's a good question. I get the sense that yes, but it was very much focused on women's sports only. And so it was allowing like girls to have recognized sporting opportunities. Good question. Okay, so next, 1992 Franklin versus Gwinnett County Public Schools. So this was related to K through 12, but it was a big decision on how we define, again, what Title IX covers, specifically in regards to sexual harassment and sexual assault. So you'll see, again, kind of the growth of how we got to where we are today through this as well. So yeah, that was included now within the Title IX definition. And the details of this case involve a coach grooming their student. So it was very inappropriate, and it, again, laid the groundwork for future policy. Any questions? Okay. So then we fast forward to 2001, which is when OCR, do we remember what that stands for? Office of Civil Rights. Well done. They released guidance on what constitutes sexual harassment. So there wasn't a super clear definition on what that was prior to 2001. Do you hear the year I'm saying? 2001, like that is not that long ago. So that also goes to show, yeah, we've got 50 years of this Title IX existing, but how you students understand Title IX today is not that old. Which I just find mind-boggling, but I'm biased. So it talks about harassment in two contexts at that point. The first is if a teacher or an employer, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like they tell you, I'll give you an A if you do XYZ things, which is what we now call quid pro quo. The second is any unwelcome sexual contact. And that, there's the caveat that it creates a hostile environment. So it really denies a student's ability to participate. You're going to hear that language again as we progress through our timeline still. But those two factors are still very important. But the scope of sexual harassment was limited to that. In what year are we talking about? 2001, yes, this millennia. So we're going to fast forward now to 2011. This is when President Obama's administration released their regulations, which was known as the Dear Colleague letter, yes. So that expanded institutions' responsibilities for addressing sexual assault and harassment, and it broadened the definition of harassment to include really just any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. So that includes sexual advances, requests for favors, other verbal, nonverbal, or physical contact of a sexual nature. And it went on to say that any kind of sexual harassment creates a hostile environment, which was not as clear in 2001. Is that making sense so far? Beautiful. Any questions? That's a great question, and I'm not entirely sure of the answer, but I think somebody has a hand up in the back that can answer it better. Yes.
The Office of Civil Rights publishes Dear Colleague letters for all sorts of different subjects. So it could be about Title IX, it could be
Title VI.
About Title VI.
Yeah.
A variety of different things. And they always title them a Dear Colleague letter. That's just the grouping of non-regulatory guidance. Because in the 2011 guidance, they did not go through the formal rulemaking process, which I think Kathleen will touch on later. But it was guidance that was issued without formal rulemaking as a Dear Colleague letter to say, these are the guidelines that you should be following. But they do that routinely with all sorts of different subjects.
Appreciate you. Yes. Okay, any other questions before I press on? Okay. So, did I hear a voice?
Wasn't that Dear Colleague letter, the situation involved, I think it was a dean of students and a student, or a dean of student didn't intervene? Am I not saying?
I don't remember that specific detail, but I do think it did not come out of nowhere. Yes. And we'll get into it a little bit more as well, but let me not get ahead of myself. So then we move on to 2015, which is when schools were then required to have somebody designated as a Title IX coordinator. Some schools may have already done that, but 2015 is when it was finally like, yeah, you need to do it. Now, it doesn't mean that it's somebody's sole job, but you had to have an individual. And because kind of what you were talking about a second ago, it didn't come out of nowhere because OCR was finding in a lot of complaints that they were investigating, the schools that did not have somebody designated were not handling their complaints in a very effective way. So that's kind of where that came from. And now we're going to fast forward to 2020. Nothing happened that year anywhere. No, so Betsy DeVos, who was the Secretary of Education during the Trump administration, released her new regulations. And that is still, in the year 2024, what we are currently operating under. And it gives me headaches to think about. But Biden has taken his sweet time. But we'll get there. But anyway, so that's currently what we're operating under. Now, again, if you want to dig into the history of this, I'm happy to talk more about it one-on-one, but kind of the, I guess, better known, shorter way to say this is that Betsy really wanted to give more rights to what Title IX calls respondents, which is the person accused of doing the thing. And it took away some of the rights, I don't want to say took away, but it really impeded the rights of complainants or victim, survivor, that person. And so when you hear of Title IX processes feeling very court-like right now, that's partly why. And I can get into kind of what investigation processes look like if that's interesting to you. I don't want to bore you. But any questions with this?
Did she talk about why she made that change?
Yes, she was not a fan of Obama's ruling within the Dear Colleague letter and their regulations that came from it, thought there were too many rights given to victims and not enough. And it was not a due process or fair adjudication for respondents under Obama's regulations. She had a strong opinion.
Parents, and I don't know if this was at that level, but a lot of parents were fearful for their sons.
Right.
Because they were going to be accused of all kinds of things all of a sudden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Talk a little bit about what she did with the definitions.
So there, in the world of Title IX, you will hear severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. Under the Obama administration, it was severe, pervasive, or objectively offensive. Do you hear the difference? So now the threshold, this is in context of harassment. The threshold for meeting the criteria to make a formal complaint is very high right now. So if you were to experience one incident that does not meet all three, which is generally going to be pervasive if it's just one time, we can't move forward with it. Again, I have strong feelings about it. It could give me a headache if I think too hard about it. But it is, in full disclosure, difficult for me in my position because my opinion is not the policy. So even if I think this is wrong and we should do something about it, I can't go outside of policy. So if, God forbid, something happens to you or somebody that you know, and they say the Title IX coordinator didn't do anything, it's not because I don't care or I don't think it happened. Is that making sense? Thanks for the question. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it normal for these types of regulations to be amended as often as they were, or is this like sort of political reaction to change of administration?
Yeah, good question. Did y'all hear the question? Is it normal for it to kind of be changing this much, such a roller coaster? Yes, and what I had noticed, especially in that mid to late 80s with that back and forth, is kind of where it feels like we are at today, where every administration, especially with the political climate feeling at least as extreme as it is right now, the term I use a lot is like swinging the pendulum. So President Obama's administration set up, really kind of paved the way for Title IX investigations and the process, as I call it. Trump then swung, or Betsy DeVos really, but swung the pendulum over here to where respondents' rights forever, which is valid. However, now we're going to swing the pendulum again a bit if Biden's regulations will ever be published, which it's becoming a political thing that I don't think it should be such a strong political chess piece, but it is. And I don't know how to fix that myself, but yes. What other questions do you have at this point? Okay. So that brings us then to 2022, which is when pregnancy started being considered something to be covered under Title IX. Now, if a pregnant student is referred to me, I'm not doing an investigation. So I'm not asking them to bring a positive test, nothing like that. But the idea is that a pregnant student can, number one, if they have medical needs, let's say, for example, you get a pregnant student who has gestational diabetes, and let's suppose they take a science class that has a very long lab, then I can help advocate to their professor that they should be able to step out of class, eat a snack, drink some orange juice, whatever, and then come back in and not be penalized for that. It also allows for them to step away from their classes to deliver the baby or take care of the pregnancy, otherwise, whatever they need to do, and then come back in without sabotaging their GPA through the process. Or, let's say they get put on bed rest and it looks like they need to take a temporary medical leave for that, I can help facilitate that process. So that brings us to present day. And there we go. So what my role is here at Longwood. So we talked a little bit in the introduction, thank you for that. I oversee the process. So that's really like my primary job here, is to make sure that Title IX is being done correctly, for lack of a better term. But really what I'm doing day to day most often is connecting students with resources and providing what we call supportive measures, which is again maybe a temporary medical leave if they need it. Let's suppose maybe there's an incident where somebody no longer feels safe in their housing. If it's on campus, I can help facilitate a move. Maybe they need to change their class schedule. I can help get that moving too. That sort of thing. So a lot of what I'm doing is resource connection and what I would call most often some kind of crisis intervention, which is where I think my background in social work and as a therapist has been very helpful. A lot of Title IX coordinators at other schools have law degrees, and they are very smart and very differently prepared. So it's interesting to see the difference between schools with Title IX coordinators. But any questions at this point? Okay. So then the big question is, what's going to happen next? So I've hinted at the Biden administration's regulations still have not come out. It's been like the carrot that's been dangled in front of us for years at this point, not an exaggeration. But we thought they were going to come out, I think last May, 2023. And then they said, just kidding, October. And then October came and went. And then they said March. But the whole processes to get to March still have not started yet. So I'm thinking more like the summer. And like I said, it has become a political pawn. And so I think this is getting kind of used as a pawn in the re-election campaign. And so I'm hopeful that we will have them before you come back to school in August. But you never know. But if that's the case, when they do come out, I will be trying to get in front of y'all more to explain what's going to change. But we do have some ideas of what might be happening. So one of those is the policy regarding harassment is going to specifically address discrimination based on somebody's sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, another term that they are using that I'll be very curious because the definition's not clear yet is sex characteristics. We'll see what that means. I think we could go around the room and share our own definitions and we'd all be a little bit different. So I'm very interested to see what that's going to wind up meaning. But I'm excited to see something specifically addressing the LGBTQ community and protecting them beyond Title VI, but also within Title IX. So that'll be there, hopefully. Then they're going to strengthen protections for pregnancy. When I'm reading through, it sounds a lot like what Longwood is already doing, which is wonderful. Hopefully that means we're ahead of the game. But really it's, again, being able to have their needs met while they're still a student. Like I said, with the lab and gestational diabetes example, or it could also be like a temporary handicap parking pass, that sort of thing. And then temporary medical leaves. So again, once I know more, I will be telling you, of course. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting, they're now, so we've talked about sexual harassment, and they're going to be changing the lingo potentially to be sex-based harassment. So that's just the new terminology. I think the definition is going to largely stay pretty similar, but it's just going to be called sex-based harassment. So our sexual misconduct policy, which we call the Title IX policy, that will stay the same, but everything will be changed to sex-based instead of sexual. Is that making sense? Okay, well that brings me to the end of my presentation. I went through a little quicker than I thought, so we've got lots of time for other questions. Yes?
Can you go over a little bit about the process, because some of us may not be familiar with that? And then has the process from Obama to Trump to what's pending changed any, or is it more definitions and who's included and that sort of thing?
Good question. Loaded question. But so as it stands right now, if somebody makes a report to me themselves, or let's say you tell a professor who is obligated to tell me, so when I receive a report, my first step in the process is to reach out. So what I always do is send a letter with a list of references through somebody, to somebody through email. It is their choice whether they want to respond to me or not. There's no pressure if the answer is no. And so then usually what I would like to do is invite them in for a conversation. I don't want to bore you too much, but we go through what your options are as far as making a report and going through the formal complaint process, doing what we call an informal resolution. You can do one or the other. I connect with LUPD if you want to do a criminal complaint process, that sort of thing. Or you can choose just supportive measures only. I just need some help getting through the semester and then move on, that's fine too. But if you choose to do a formal complaint process, that is where 2 investigators will be assigned. These are faculty and staff people who have been trained. So they'll meet with the complainant, the respondent, any witnesses that get named, and collect evidence. And it may or may not proceed to a hearing, which is going to feel a lot like a court process. And this is where some of the changes get highlighted, because under the current regulations, it is very much like a court process where there's an opportunity for cross-examination from the opposing party advisor, which could get ugly. I have not, knock on wood, not overseen that at this point yet, but from what I understand, that's where things can get really traumatic really quickly. That is something that's hopefully going to change under the new regulations, but we'll see. But yeah, so moving through that formal complaint process, if it gets to a hearing, is difficult. Which is again where I think some of my background hopefully helps with that too, because I recognize that it's re-traumatizing to be telling the story over and over and potentially have somebody coming at you with really aggressive questioning or trying to invalidate whatever's being said. So, yes?
And like ballpark, what percentage of students or complainants respond back to the email that you sent?
Oh, that's a very good question. Did everybody hear that? How often are people actually responding to me? I would say probably less than half respond. And some will come in for like an intro meeting and say that maybe, can you notify my professors that this thing happened? Which, yes, I can. And that's kind of it. That happens pretty often. But yeah, not a lot of people respond back, which is part of why I wanted to do something like this, where I can get in front of students and introduce myself, because I haven't been here super long, and so I'm hopeful the more I can talk to y'all and actually get to know you, the more that y'all will know too, oh hey, Kathleen's a normal person and is going to help me through this, and hopefully not intimidating. So yeah. But I do wonder if that's maybe part of why people don't respond, because they don't know me, which is understandable. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about what Longwood or your office is doing to make people aware about the new pregnancy protections? For example, I didn't know anything about that. So like, are you working with the health center at all, or wellness, to talk about like how pregnant students can be protected in these ways?
That's a good question. It happened right as I started the job, so admittedly I have not done a good job with advertising this, and I'm glad we're talking about it, because I do think I need to partner up with other people across campus, but it is in our Title IX policy, so you can find it in the student handbook. But if a student were to tell somebody like you who previously didn't know, that might not get them where they need to go. So yeah, I do need to do a better job. Thank you.
It sounds like you're really able to say yes to most requests. It's like you're very helpful and resourceful, and
I try to be.
what
Yeah.
they need, you want to give. But I imagine there are requests that you're not able to satisfy. Can you give us a
Yes.
sense of what some of those tasks might be?
Sure. So sometimes students, and again, I have a history with working with folks through trauma. So I recognize, please don't hear a victim blaming tone with this. But sometimes people will wait to report until we're like getting close to exam week because it's like, oh crap, I'm about to go home and this has been weighing on me and I'm finally ready to tell my story and get some help. And once we get that late in the semester, dropping classes or possibly taking the temporary medical leave is no longer possible because we're too far into it. So then it's really helping, okay, how can we kind of contain this as much as possible to get you through and then work through the trauma and getting the help that you need. So that's one that I experience most often. The other thing, and this changed under Trump administration, I don't know, I'm not as familiar with the bounds within Obama administration, but currently, in order for somebody to proceed through a formal process, the incident must have occurred on campus or at a Longwood sponsored event. So like an away sports game. If it occurred on Buffalo Street, Title IX does not have jurisdiction anymore. So that happens where somebody was assaulted or something like that off campus. And all I can do at that point is resource provision and supportive measures. I'm still there to help, and I'm still happy to connect and support. I'm still happy to chat. But as far as pursuing a Title IX complaint, I don't have jurisdiction.
It really does seem like personal and policy collide.
Exactly, yes. Yes, which is really hard too because, as I'm sure y'all know as therapists too, and just in general, going through a criminal process might not be the right answer, but if it occurred off campus and you want some kind of quote unquote justice, Title IX is no longer an option either. And so it's really kind of, you've already been traumatized and now I'm trying to help you come up with what is going to feel somewhat helpful and then really just support you and try to help as much as possible. Yeah. What else? Okay, so I challenge you then as your homework, when the next time you talk to a parent or somebody like an aunt or an uncle or something like that, ask them what's the first thing you think of when you think of Title IX. And if they say sports, that opens the opportunity for you to say yes and share more of what you learned. Cool. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. We have a bunch of events this semester. I just wanted to let you know about our next event is February 28th, a film called Paris is Burning, which is going to be held in Hole 132, which was where we were having our talks last semester. So that's just coming up in a couple weeks here. It's also a Wednesday. A lot of our events are happening on Wednesdays, except one event, special event that's going to happen on Monday, a social event that's going to happen on Monday. But yes, if you have any questions for Kathleen, I'm sure she'll stick around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you again very much to Conifer. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.